Welcome back to Morning at NTV. Remember, the hashtag is still on, hashtag Morning at NTV, and today we're talking about remuneration. And as I promised before we went on the break, we will be having Dr. Douglas Opio, Mr. Douglas Opio, who is the Executive Director of the Federation of Uganda Employers, and he is actually also an Executive Council member of the East African Employers Organization. He holds a Master's of Bachelor Administration, a Bachelor of Development Studies, and a postgraduate diploma in private sector growth. So he is the person to talk to this morning, and for the past 8 years he has been working on labor employment matters both locally and internationally, and he is a strong proponent for sustainable growth in employment. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Today we are talking about employment. We acknowledge the fact that the Federation of Uganda Employers is pretty much on the formal sector and not on the informal sector. But as you watched when we were engaging people on the ground in the informal sector, the border riders, the SMEs, the major issue that is coming is they work so hard but they get so little. Yeah. What do you have to say about that, and what can you tell them, and how can they go about it to just make sure that then they're in a position to be confident enough to actually ask for better deals, since it's a sharing deal?
Yeah, sure. Now, remuneration is directly linked to value. So if you look at the value we generate, especially in the informal sector, is low value. And that also explains why we have low remuneration. I was watching it, the gentleman was talking about a cup of tea at 2,000. Now that's different from the formal sector cup of tea. It's much highly priced. So you cannot expect a higher remuneration when the value you generate is low value. So to get a higher remuneration, you must justify that you're creating more value.
More value.
And any employer would be happy to pay you a higher price.
Okay, so for example, what should you tell a border rider who is in a kind of partnership deal with a border owner?
Yeah.
How can they go about justifying to the border owners that, you know what, instead of a 50-50 kind of deal, how about we do a 60-40 kind of deal, where I get the 60 and you get the 40, or whatever kind of sharing they would come to, you know? What would you tell them in terms of how do they approach, how do they go about it? Because I know even for you to get to where you are, because you had that confidence in approaching your employer and telling them, you know what, I think I'm giving this much value, then how about we reform and relook what I'm getting paid?
I think it's a negotiated arrangement, first of all. And also there is the one who is the asset owner in this particular case.
Yes.
So it's quite difficult to expect to earn more than the asset owner. That's first expectation that I must note is unrealistic. So it's not possible for the border guy to get 60% and the owner of the bike to get a 40%.
So it's a done deal, 50-50?
50-50, I think, would be the fairest you can come to, because there must be a reason for someone to invest, essentially. Because by investing, it takes on quite a number of risks. For instance, the repair of the bike is not the responsibility of the bike rider. If the bike gets lost, the boss is under pressure to replace that bike. So there are a lot of things that come into play. If he's a registered business person, you have seen safe borders around, he has to pay his lances. Even when he's not a registered or a lances operator, he still has to pay his taxes. He still has to meet other costs. So it's unfair to expect the asset owner to get the smaller proportion.
So it all boils down to the productivity of the border rider to ensure that they, you know, transport as many clients as possible so they can maximize on the after day kind of revenues they will get.
Absolutely, because that's what you use to negotiate. You explain to your boss, this is the value I'm generating. So based on this value, I think it's only fair that you pay me this much. And the boss also would be quaking, if I lose this guy, then I'm losing quite a lot. But if you're not generating much value, it's difficult for you also to come and try and negotiate for a higher pay, because it will just simply tell you, no, I will get somebody else. But it's not as easy to say I will get somebody else if the one who is working at the moment is generating much more value.
Okay, so it all boils down to productivity and what you have to bring on the table in monetary value.
I agree.
Okay, let's now shift gears to the formal sector, where you are the big man at.
Yes.
Still, okay, in the informal sector, we've had these issues, people feeling that they're being, you know, overworked and getting less pay. Exploitation comes into play. And it's the same thing in the formal sector. So as the Federation of Uganda Employers, what have you done to try and, you know, handle that on a personal front and also on a, you know, on a general front to ensure that employees get paid for the value they give?
Now, with the employers, first of all, we look at it from the point that if you pretend to pay as an employer, the workers also pretend to work. So it's a loss on both sides. The employee loses, but also the employer loses. What we have been doing with the employers is trying to raise the level of productivity. So we have quite a number of skills enhancement training, but also just supervision. Sometimes the quality of supervision at workplaces is just so miserable. Setting targets for your employees, because if you have clearly set targets and you know what you'll be capable of producing within a given period of time, then it's much more easy to set the remunerations. And then also identify which positions are critical to the business. There are certain positions which are mission critical and the employer can't afford to lose them. So we are always constantly engaging with them, but also we do what we call the terms and condition survey. So every year we do salary surveys to try and help the employers to understand what is in the market. What are the other employers paying? Because you run a risk of losing your most talented employees if you're not paying the right price.
If you're not paying the right price. Of late, there's been this debate on the minimum wage bill. What stand has the Federation of Ugandan Employers taken in this wrangle? Because it's actually a wrangle, because many are saying if we then embrace, you know, this minimum wage bill will scare away investors and all these other factors. What do you have to say about it?
Actually, that's generally the wrong argument that will scare away investors. All serious investors are actually paying the right value for the labor they get. As a federation, we have also conducted a survey among employers specifically on the minimum wage. The employers are not against the minimum wage, they're against the wrong minimum wage. So they want the minimum wage to be set in a fair manner that takes into account the ability of the employer to pay. Because if you set the wages so high, then compliance will be a problem. Then businesses won't be able to operate. That's where the risk comes in, because the minimum wage have not been set at the right level. But the minimum wage in itself is not a problem. Even right now, every single workplace operates with the minimum. It only varies from one workplace to another. That for us, our lowest earning employee earns this much. That's already existing in every single workplace. They know that we can't go below this.
I hear you. I hear you. We have Andrew on standby. Andrew? Andrew? Andrew, I hear you have a question for us. We have Douglas Opio in studio, and he doesn't mind answering questions coming from the informal sector. No problem. So which question do you have to shoot for him? Okay, it seems that we still can't get through to Andrew. So you say the employers don't have an issue with the minimum wage. But the issue is the rate that is going to be proposed.
Absolutely.
So what factors are they looking at in terms of when now we say, okay, we're going to go with this minimum wage thing and it's going to be passed. So what factors come into play to determine that rate?
First, from the employer's side, is the cost of doing business. Some of the employers use imported material, and you have seen the shillings weakening over time. But also general economic performance, not just in Uganda. The economies of the world have not been doing well. So the cost of doing business is generally high. So you'd have to factor that in because that affects the margin. Secondly, the level of productivity. And you have had the discussion already about how productivity in Uganda is generally lower compared to even our sister countries. In certain professions, in certain specific occupation, that's correct, but not across the board. There are the areas where Ugandans are performing exceptionally well, so it is not the general rule. And actually the study which is often referred to a lot is a study based on tea pickers. So they essentially compared the Kericho Valley tea pickers and our own tea pickers in the western region, and they saw the quality of what they picked within an hour and what their Kenyan counterparts did, and then they found that their productivity was much higher. But you can't translate the same thinking into another profession. For instance, we have the lights here. Yes. Doesn't mean for a single job, now you have one Kenyan, you have 6 Ugandans trying to fix this light. If you take it that way, then you take it out of context. These were purely for tea pickers, and the comparison was purely for tea pickers. So there are areas where we are doing well, but there are also areas where we are not doing well. And then the other thing which is critical for the employer is the ability to retain a level. Employers are responsible people. They want to pay aspect of it. They want to pay a rate that is reasonable for them to retain.
So they can retain the best talent within their organizations. Absolutely. We have Andrew. Andrew, can you hear me? Andrew, are you on? I can hear you, Marlon. Yeah, we have Douglas Opio in studio, the Executive Director of the Uganda Federation of Employers. And I understand that you have a question on ground for him.
Yes.
Shoot.
I've been following. Nice to have you, Mr. Opio. But what I want to ask is that how do you come around to get a figure for the layman, Omuntu wa wansi? Because our bosses are not following a particular manual to which they actually get to pay us. That is one. Then secondly, have you taken the trouble to come down to sensitize the people, to show them their right? Have you stood tall and, you know, advocated for the wage bill to pass? All these, and where are your offices? Because where I am, it's a landing site. The fisherman here, tamanyi office wajeziri, in case they're troubled. Are you only looking at the formal sector other than the informal sector, or is it selective? These are the questions we have on the ground here.
Mr. Douglas?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I will start with the last. Okay. Are we looking at the formal and the informal? From a pure membership point of view, our focus is on the formal sector. Okay. But then from the holistic development agenda point of view, we are looking also at the informal sector. Essentially, we are looking at formalization of the informal sector. We have specific training programs that are targeting, trying to help these people to formalize. We have an entrepreneurship program called Start and Improve Your Business. So that takes you through the process of formalizing your business, trying to maximize value. So from a membership point...
How can people plug onto that program?
It's a program that we run at least in every 3 months, once, and they can come to the Federation of Uganda Employers and register with us for the training, and then they will be able to participate. So it's just a matter of coming to our offices, and that goes to the question of where are our offices located. Our offices are located at the industrial area in Namamve, just shortly after Red Pepper. You will see a signpost of the Federation of Uganda Employers to the left when you're heading towards Mukono. So yeah, you can get our offices there. And then on the advocacy side, what are we doing? We have been engaging a lot in the minimum wage debate. The Federation is represented on the Minimum Wage Advisory Board, which has been working towards setting an appropriate minimum wage for the country. That board has already completed its work. It has made a submission already to Cabinet. So we're waiting anytime soon what the minimum wage in Uganda could be. So we're working on that. And then you ask the question, how do you arrive at the right wages, especially in the informal sector. The informal sector first is driven by what we call the supply and demand. I'm talking as a shrewd businessman. So first you look at the people you want to employ. Are they readily available or not? So supply and demand can't be ignored. You can't overpay, you can't underpay. So supply and demand is the first thing. Then secondly, what is the industry paying? If it is border riders, ask a few of your colleagues, what are they actually paying? So based on what they're paying, then you can look at yours and see which one would be reasonable. Thirdly, depending on what you're doing, skill could be extremely important. So if you're a restaurant person, for instance, there are certain people with very nice skills, and when they cook, customers will always come back. So skill is also important. So you also have to consider the skill of the person that you want to engage. And then thirdly, which is also, fourthly, which is very important, is the cost. So you look at your overall business cost, because generally your cost you pay for labor must be lower than your margins. Yeah, must be lower than your margins. For instance, if your profit is 10% of what you have invested, you can't pay anybody 10% of your margins, your gross margins.
But then does it come back to the question of how then do businesses ensure that they maximize on profits, like they grow in terms of profits? What tactics that come into play that they can embrace to make sure their businesses actually grow and they're profitable?
Absolutely. Now, the enterprise productivity is the main thing, actually, because over time you can be able to pay a higher wage based on the performance of your business. Now, the first one, which we have a challenge in the informal sector, is the supervision of your workers. There's an assumption that people will work and deliver value, but that's the wrong assumption. So first, have your system in place. Are these guys actually working? Whatever it is, that we have a serious challenge. So have your supervision system well.
Yes.
Then secondly, do they actually know what they're doing? You can be surprised. People might not have the right skills. People might be using the long processes. People might be being so wasteful in the process of their work. So check their skills. Is it at the right level? And that's where the issue of training comes in. And in the informal sector, it's quite easy. You could even just tag them along with somebody else who is doing a similar business so that they can learn exactly how to do things.
So supervision is key.
Yes.
And also training of
Yes,
these people.
the
Don't
skill.
assume they know what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely.
Andrew, we are on standby for you. I hear you have a question for Mr. Douglas Opio.
Oh, yes. Well, Mr. Douglas Opio, thank you so much for the response. That was profound. But back here, we're in a boat, and with one of the fishermen here, Sebo Jebali. Federation of Employers Association, ogimanyi? Obadde togimanyi. Kati kino kibiina ekigatta abatukozesa bonna mu ggwanga nti boosi wo ayinza okuba nga nannyini maato oba kwegamba kyekibiina kino gye baddukira okuba nti babaako ebintu bye baadressinga ne babitereeza. Kati gwe ng'omuntu wa wansi era omuvubi nti kati leero okitegedde obadde olowooza kwegamba ki ky'obasaba okuba nti batereezaamu kuba kati obategedde?
Kati nze nga kye nandibadde nsaba amannya bampita Makanga Medi era nga nze nkulira abavuzi abavuga amaato ku bulebole stage. Naye naffe eno wansi bandibadde bagaziya ekintu eno naffe wansi eno ne kitutuukako kubanga kati bo babanire bali abali mu ofiisi ate ffe eno tebatutuukako era kati ffe tubadde tetumanyi
kituufu. Well, there you have it, Mala. The gentleman here, erinnya ndyerabidde?
Makanga Medi.
Mwami Makanga Medi. He says that it would be better if this association would actually spread more and come down to the common man. Omuntu wa wansi feels that he's more neglected, is left out on such thing, because such an association has benefits they could actually benefit from, but they don't spread to them. So he's of a suggestion, let this not stop only to the formal sector, but let it come down more and let it spread. I'm sure Mr. Opio can find a lasting measure how best it can spread.
Thank you. Most obliged, actually. Mr. Makanga, I appreciate that advice from your side. We'll definitely work towards expansion towards the informal sector.
Okay. So it's something that you're looking into?
It's something we're looking into, and I think it's only helpful.
Yes.
Because the economy, the way it's structured, it's nearly 90% informal sector.
Exactly.
Yeah, so by not taking care of the informal sector, we are ignoring a significant proportion of our economy.
Are you in a position to tell us how soon that will happen?
Already, like I have explained, that's already happening. It's
so
the
it's
scale.
Actually, okay.
It's happening, but the pace of change is slow.
The pace of change is slow.
Is slow.
But it's actually happening.
It's
in
already
the
happening.
pipeline.
Yeah,
so they should
happening.
wait for you to...
Absolutely,
it's coming
absolutely.
Up,
and we would be happy to receive requests from specific groups. Then we can always engage. So
okay.
Mr. Makanga and his colleagues should feel free to contact us.
That's great.
Yeah.
There's this question of not all the formal organizations are actually members of the Federation. And this, the organizations that are actually not under the Federation then feel like they can, you know, pay whatever they want. Then the employee is actually not protected. So as the Federation of Uganda Employers, what strategies are you using to ensure that you put under your umbrella, you bring under your umbrella as many formal organizations as possible?
Now, first of all, to respond to that, I appreciate already that NTV has invited us here. NTV is a member, so we appreciate this platform. This is one of the things we are doing, trying to increase our visibility, trying to increase awareness among employers. That's why we are not yet as known, but already today I've gotten a few more new people like Mr. Makanga who already knows the Federation now. And then secondly, we also organize some free trainings, especially labor law sensitization. All that is done with, and we target usually those who are not members, is done with the same intention. And we also have foot soldiers, people who are literally moving from one company to another, trying to persuade them to become members. So we are working in that area, but it's a work in progress.
Okay, and what procedures do you have in place for companies that actually exploit their employees? You know, like forms and procedures where you've put in place such that if an employee feels that I've been exploited, I've tried my best to, you know, air my views, to air my complaints, and nothing is being done. What avenues or how can they go about it to ensure that, you know what, something is being done about it? Because we've seen many sectors going, for the employees going into strikes. And this has become a phenomenon, meaning there's actually a clear underlying issue that is not being solved. So what do you have to say about that?
Now, with regard to that, we address it in various ways. First, we address it independently as a federation, meaning you can report any concerns that you might have with your employers to us, and then us as the employer representative, we can sit down with the employer and engage the employer on the issues that you're raising.
Is it just for employers that are members of the...
No, that's open to all employers.
Correct.
So essentially, we first engage your employer if the employer would always have their side as well. So they don't assume it's entirely correct that the employer is on the wrong when an employee has reported a case, but sometimes the employer actually may not even be in the wrong. So we initiate that dialogue between the employee and the employer. Then secondly, we also work with our counterparts from the trade unions. So we also can hold a negotiation between these employee and the employer involving the trade union representatives. So the employee can also act independent of us. That's the third option. The third option is for you to report directly to NOTO, and then if you're not satisfied, you go to the labor office. If you're not satisfied, you can even move further with your case. So it's not entirely dependent on us. The employee can take their own course, but we appreciate if the employees come to us and report their employers. We appreciate dialogue with such an employer.
You appreciate dialogue with such an employer.
Yeah.
There's this thing about the market rate in the different sectors,
Yeah.
where there's a stable market rate
Yeah.
of a for the various sectors
Absolutely.
and various departments,
Yes.
and the the responsibilities that are in this kind of departments. How come then does, for example, me, who is in this place, doing this job, get less paid or more paid compared to, my fellow maybe competitor in a different media house who is getting maybe higher paid than me, and we're doing the same things? How comes that actually happens on a day-to-day basis?
Now that's a very simple one. First, the level of profitability of businesses are different. Even in the same industry, you might find the turnover of NTV is not the same as the turnover for SPAC, for instance, within the same group of companies even. So that then determines their cost margins as well. You can't have the same cost when your level of profitability are different. Then secondly, the quality. I've explained a lot about value and productivity.
Correct.
So the value that you might be delivering might be higher compared to the value another one is delivering. You might be having 1 million followers, meaning the viewership of even NTV is much more widespread compared to another person presenting a similar program, reaching, let's say, 10,000 people.
Correct.
Yeah, so the value you bring also determine how well you're paid.
So it boils down to the profitability of the organization and also the value that you bring that can be justifiable.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the issue of appraisals.
Yes.
This is something that is done in the formal sector with the employers.
Yes.
But it's actually never effected. It never takes ground in many formal sector organizations.
Yes.
What do you have to say about that, and what have you done as the Federation of Uganda Employers to make sure that actually every employer that is under your umbrella appraises all their employees in time, and that there's like a good margin of the appraisal, because at times you can do an appraisal but the only thing that is added onto your salary is 1,000 Uganda shillings.
Yes.
What do you have to say about that? What have you done to ensure that appraisals is an aspect that is taken seriously in organizations?
Now, first of all, is to understand what appraisal is. So we have been doing lots of trainings. I was talking about supervisory skills, for instance. It includes training on performance appraisal. We have an executive training in employment relations. It includes aspects of performance appraisal. So first is to help people to understand what is actually performance appraisal. Because you can't come at the end of the year and you want to appraise me when no targets were set at the beginning. How do you then determine I've delivered or have not delivered? So that's very important. And then the appraisals don't necessarily mean a pay raise. The two are different. Okay. The fact that I'm appraised and I've done well doesn't imply that I should get a pay raise, for instance. Okay. So it's not entirely purely for pay raises only. A pay raise is part of the general performance of the organization.
So then if it does not reflect on the monetary, aspect of it, then what is an appraisal then?
An appraisal is to see whether you're performing as expected.
And is there an incentive to it, even though it's not monetary? Is there an incentive to it?
Absolutely. There are various ways which organizations do it. Some can just choose to make you an employee of the year.
Correct.
Some can even choose to give you a holiday trip because you did so well for the year. Some can give you a bonus, meaning a one-off, not particularly a pay raise, but they can choose to give you a bonus. Some can choose to give you a new title, which is more fancy, what you like. Or some can actually decide to promote you.
So an appraisal is directly pegged on with an incentive.
Absolutely,
Correct.
Absolutely. It has to be incentivized, otherwise then the purpose is lost.
So as we close, what are your closing remarks with regards to remuneration, and actually for people to know that they are responsible of their pay when it comes to, number one, when you get that new job, how do you negotiate when you're there? How then do you also make sure that you are praised?
Yes.
How then do you also ensure that you grow and you're productive?
Yeah.
Like being competitive with your own self and
Yeah.
challenging yourself to be the best you can be.
Yeah.
What are your last comments on that?
First, make yourself indispensable to your employer. Meaning, make yourself somebody the employer would dread to lose. Now, when you're that type, then you're in a position where your employer will accept your demands. And you can only do that by increasing your value. Let your value be felt. Let your level of productivity be felt. Let your level of commitment be felt by an employer.
Correct.
Then, secondly, agree with your employer on your targets for the period, so that this is what I'm supposed to do. Have I delivered it? Have I not delivered it? And then consistently seek for improvement.
Correct.
Improve your skills, whatever it is, any occupation. Be on the lookout. What are the opportunities for me to improve, enhance my skills? If you do that, you will be in a much better position. You will come to the employer and negotiate for a wage which he will be very happy to pay.
Correct. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
A pleasure.
So you've heard it from the horse's mouth. Make sure that you are as productive as possible, even if it means to self-educate, challenge yourself on a day-to-day basis to be the best that you can be. And when you negotiate with your employer, ensure that you put, targets. Targets are good because then they push you to be the best you can be. Have time-based targets. And the other thing, like he said, ensure that you are unstoppable, because when you are unstoppable, when you know your skill and you know your job and you do your best, then the employer has no other options than to hear and heed to your demands. We have Flavia on standby. Flavia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mala. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Interesting discussion you're having in studio.
Yes.
And I understand you have Dr. Micha Gwan with you?
Yes, I do. Looking forward to this conversation because he actually helped me understand better how to rate and value myself in the industry. So I'm looking forward to that. If you're watching, grab a paper, pen. If you're digital, fine, grab your phone. You have to take notes. But that's after the break.